I am a graduate student in evolutionary game theory. We work under the assumption that animals will behave rationally because they will evolve to do so. Any non-optimal strategy will be punished by selection. By what mechanism do you expect people to translate the predictions of crisis bargaining models into action? If it takes analysis of a model to produce some counterintuitive best strategy in a game, how do you expect them to follow the predictions of the model? Let me give you the broader argument before cutting to specifically how crisis bargaining works. At the leadership level, the standard point is that it is difficult to be astrategic and reach the head of government, never mind stay in that position for any meaningful amount of time. For example, you will hear that Kim Jong-un is crazy, but what I see is that he and his family are crazy good at staying in power. At the bureaucratic level, these organizations tend to be fairly long-lived, and bureaucrats who are better at their jobs tend to rise in the hierarchy. Now, that is not the only basis for a promotion, but it is the leading one. And bureaucracies have their own pathologies, sure, but usually that is because there are competing interests fighting each other, rather than due to behavioral defects of those working there. These factors combined mean that the baseline expectation we should have is that states take actions that align with their preferences, bearing in mind that those preferences can be diverse. But we in the analyst world are not about to jump to, "Rawr, all leaders are irrational," whenever we observe something curious. Ironically, part of the problem that this irrationality crowd has is not recognizing that there is a saliency bias here. Imagine all leaders are perfectly strategic for a moment. If we think that strategic behavior only leads to bizarre outcomes from an observer's perspective about 5% of the time, we would still see plenty of bizarre things happen in the world, and, moreover, we would pay far more attention to those. That, I think, aligns much better with the world that we live in, compared to the hypothesis that all leaders are irrational, which would mean that we should expect very little in the world to ever make sense. In any case, one of the things that drew me to crisis bargaining in the first place is how natural of strategic questions it asks of states. The core model literally asks, hey, what do you think you will get if you fight a war? And how costly do you think it will be to obtain those goals? Basically, every government on the planet has massive bureaucracies dedicated to answering those questions. So even if you were skeptical about my previous argument, you do not need as much faith in state-level strategy to still expect crisis bargaining to be a useful analytical tool. Indeed, the more complicated models we tend to discuss do not take esoteric turns either. How strong will my opponent be next year is also a very basic question that those bureaucracies try to answer. Are we sure that our opponent will concede if we make this demand is again basic enough, especially given that much of what intelligence organizations do is try to figure out things that they are not sure about. In my career, I have briefed a good number of policymakers on this subject. Not once, as in never, have any of them looked at me in absolute confusion about anything I was doing. College freshmen? Very firm beliefs that this is all nonsense. Trolls on the internet? Same for them. But never for policymakers. Usually, the reaction is more along the lines of, I haven't thought about the problem in this way before, but it is a concise framework to analyze the issues. The second most common reaction is concern that I did not consider topic X, but usually that is because I am presenting page 5 of the textbook, and the concern is on page 305. Every now and then, there will be a genuinely new concern raised. Those are great because then I can do the corresponding research and publish my findings. Actually, over the last few years, there has been a third reaction. Cool, I just met William Spaniel. And I have to say, after having experienced the stereotypical academic situation, where policymakers do not care at all about what we do, this evolution has been very satisfying. But the question asked where I think the disconnect between theory and practice arises, and I do have a clear answer there. When I am solving a model, I do not care about what your specific probability of victory is. I just call it P. I do not care about what your specific cost of war is. I just call it C sub A. And I do not care about what your actual equilibrium demand is. I generically calculate it as P minus C sub A. That is because I care about how the scenario broadly works for all possible distributions of power and costs, not precisely how any particular pairs of states will play it. But this is pure insanity from the perspective of someone who works in, say, the Pentagon. They cannot approach Iran and say, "We demand P minus C sub A." They have to make real proposals, which means having a numerical estimation of a percentage likelihood of victory and a price tag on the costs. And again, by and large, I think that they do a pretty good job of that. Where our models tend to produce counterintuitive results is in the comparative statics, which is a fancy term that means asking how equilibrium dynamics change when we alter a single parameter while holding everything else constant. For example, what happens when I slightly increase my opponent's cost of war? I think everyone understands the first order effect. They pay more if they fight. Duh. The second order effect, that they accept a wider range of proposals, is also straightforward. But after that, it can get messy. There are a whole bunch of ways that higher costs can result in a higher overall probability of war, due to how the higher cost alters the optimal demand. I have faith that policymakers do fairly well when dropped into a situation where there is a particular cost given to them. I have less faith in them making institutional design decisions. Things like, if we impose sanctions on this target government, will it help end their ongoing civil war? These questions are difficult, and they come up infrequently enough that policymakers do not get sufficient feedback to adjust their expectations accordingly. You need modeling work to get a better grasp on the incentives. That wraps up today's edition of the Geopolitics Helpline. Check out the archive of previous questions here. And if you enjoyed today's video, then please like, share, and subscribe, and I will see you next time. Take care.